We have the next speaker coming up, and it is Jonas Andrulis, and he is a serial entrepreneur, and his latest company is called Alep Alpha, former AI R&D manager at Apple, very interesting, I think, and the forefront of development towards transformative AI. So you are focusing on computer vision and language processing and called your speech The Last Project, and I'm really curious to hear what that is.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, this is a little bit the vision that Christian ordered. So if you paid attention, or if you were here this morning on the talk that Hans and Chris gave, this is a little bit of a deep dive into that. And what I want to kind of think together with you about is what is the meaning of work? What does how a human life have revolved around? And is AI maybe getting in position to change a bunch of that? So basically, this is not the first slide. This is not the first slide, still not the first slide. This is the first slide. What is work? So when we look back into the history of mankind, of humanity, right? We've been organizing ourselves around working together, about doing something together and sharing our skills and contributing together fighting for survival, right? Fighting against famine, fighting against illness, building houses to protect ourselves from nature. And this was, at the beginning, is pretty straightforward. Like if you're a monkey and you collect some roots and then so you have something to eat and you don't starve the next day. And then you can change that maybe for something that somebody else did. So this starts pretty straightforward. And for the longest time of humanity, this has been a struggle for survival. Life was incredibly hard for pretty much everybody. Like even a king a few hundred years ago had it significantly worse than probably almost everybody now. And this was basically driven a lot by agriculture. Right? It's like this nature and the energy that comes from the sun, and lets crops grow, and then we harvest those. And so this is basically work in a way, and then pretty much building a shelter so we don't get wet. Still pretty forward, right? Straightforward. So why are we all getting paid for what we do all day? None of us, I'm assuming, is doing any of that. And so how do we justify the money we are taking home? What's happening here? And what's happening here is that we are shifting a lot of the value we are creating away from these like super like down to earth and super kind of at the basis work to more creative work, more information-based work. And this you could categorize into like knowledge work, collecting knowledge, preserving knowledge, making knowledge accessible, innovation, like inventing things like the wheel here, and what's the thing on the left? Entertainment. Right? And because we have the basic survival covered, we know there will be a Snickers bar tomorrow that we can eat, and we know that there's kind of like a house we can come home to. We have shifted a lot of the work we're doing and a lot of the value creation that we have into these three fields, and we call them knowledge work. And that's pretty interesting, right? And maybe you can come up with other categories we wanna nail, like the composition of knowledge work down to. And what's interesting from an AI perspective now is that AI is branching heavily into at least two of the three. There's still some question marks on innovation. There's a report from Open Philanthropy, and this report is estimating the timeline for transformative AI. And transformative AI in the definition of Open Philanthropy is basically AI technology that can do most of what we today call work, can potentially reorganize the global power balance, and it can also do the work of human scientists, so it can drive innovation. We're not there yet. When you ask Open Philanthropy about their timeline, they are estimating that we're somewhere around 2030 we can get that. So what does that have to do with our work? What does it have to do with what Hans talked about this morning? Is that we are seeing a lot of movement here on language models. So what are language models? In case you haven't heard the talk this morning, is they're basically just looking at all the language that humanity has ever created, like all books, all chats, all scientific papers, and they're asking themselves the question, if I cut this text off at any position, and I'm trying to guess how it might continue. So that's pretty similar to what you have in your cell phone. You can basically start typing something in your cell phone, and then your cell phone will give you suggestions, or Google search here on the right hand for how this could continue. And when you're familiar with these kind of Google search things, then you would ask yourself immediately, why is that so groundbreaking, right? So if I start with good, then I get the suggestion, good morning, so I'm saving a bunch of time, but why is that groundbreaking in the sense of knowledge work? Well, it turns out that these models not only learn like patterns of words that are next to each other, they basically learn the structure and the world of all human language. I've been calling them world models for a long time, and this is a nod to Jürgen Schmidhuber, who is here as well, right? Because they're also, in a way, world models, but not world in the sense of our physical world, but in the world of all human language. And you can basically say they're predicting the continuation of all of human language that exists. So basically, we have built language to be useful for all of knowledge. Like, language is invented by us even, right? To be purpose optimal for everything that matters to us. Like knowledge, but also ourselves, our experience, what we care about. All that is part of the structure of the high-dimensional distribution of language in a way. And if we are building a world model that understands that, then we have a tremendously powerful tool. So, and I'm going back now because the first slide is supposed to come now. This one, right? So this is our model. You've seen it this morning on Hans' slide. We're at least on the same chart as the US, right? We're not leading, but at least there's a European company that's on the same chart. And so basically, if you now use our language model, and this is on the top-hand side, you see a prompt, and on the bottom side, you see a completion. So you're asking the model, what's the most likely completion of this text? And so if your text is Angela Merkel was born in, then the model again gives you a probability distribution over tokens, which in this case, it's pretty confident that Hamburg is the right answer, which luckily it's correct. But you can also do something else. You can also say English, the future will be wild, and then Deutsch for German, and then you get a translation. So basically, a model that has just been trained on what you've seen earlier on kind of like these cell phone autocomplete by accident, and this was a surprise to many, and myself included, is able to do a bunch of things that you would consider to be knowledge work, like doing a translation, right? Retrieving factual knowledge about the world. That's something that we would not have expected a model that's basically just a stupid deep learning model that we throw a bunch of data at would be able to solve. And what that means, right, so here's another example. And of course, what we've built this model, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to not only write cool papers about it and cool blog posts, but we're also trying to use this model to transform our work and to offer foundational technology for an industrial revolution. And this is just an example, right? This is like when you go to our website, you can register for our playground, you get some free credits, you can try this out by yourselves, and you can upload like a Word document. And this is the quarterly report from HPE, Q1 2022. And then you can ask questions about this document. And I'm asking a question here about the free cash flow guidance for 22. What's the free cash flow guidance? And then the model answers fiscal 22 free cash flow guidance is in the range of 1.8 to 2.0 billion. And if you're familiar with what QA models have done in the past, right? There's like BERT-based extractive QA models. Those were neat at the time, but this is like a far cry from that. This is like significantly more powerful. And there's some examples that I haven't brought today, but where the model is answering questions about things that are only really there between the lines. So there's no clear mentioning where you could extractively just point to tokens in your evidence document, but you basically have to understand what the author, in this case, I tried it out with, is like on short stories. Right? So it's like almost like a lyrical finesse that it's able to offer. So what you can do is, this is one part of knowledge work, search and transform. And recently, there was an interview in Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. It's supposed to be a transparent background, but you can imagine the white box as transparent. So there was an interview, and the last question of the interviewer, Alex Armbruster, was, when will I be able to have an interview like I'm having with you now with an AI, right? So of course what I did is I copied the question into our AI model and basically hit submit. And the answer that the AI model gave without any training, without any further interference from my side was, that's an interesting question. I believe that in the next few years we will be able to have a dialogue with an AI, but not in the same way as today. We have to get involved and accept the technology in order to understand what it can do, because there will always be new technologies that will change our world and also turn it back again. There's already first approaches for intelligent assistance in the fields of medicine or transportation, as well as, of course, for robots themselves. But I think these are only small steps in the way for human-AI interaction. So that was the answer, straight out of the machine. The only thing I did was I few-shot biased it with the answers of the two questions before that, right? So I can be like, question n-2, answer, question n-1, answer, question n. And that was basically it. So that's creating, innovating knowledge, right? So with all the interviews we're all having, wouldn't it be great if we had just an AI that would do all the interviews for us? How much time would we save? That would be awesome. So one of the inventions that came out of our Heidelberg lab is multimodal models. And of course, there have been multimodal models before, but we dialed it up a notch, and that was kind of the basis also for what DeepMind did with Flamingo now. It's basically we enhance the language model. We have like our language model speaks 5 languages. So basically what we said is, how can we enhance the capabilities such that the prompt can be any combination of text or images? Right? So basically we want to retain all the functionality of the language model, but we also want to be able to understand images. And here are some examples, right? So the green text here is what the model completed in a certain prompt. And if you are familiar with the clip discussion on adversarial attacks, right, then you might find this funny. I do. This was an example where the clip model from OpenAI got quote-unquote attacked. For full transparency, I argued at the time that this wasn't an attack, but actually underspecified behavior about an apple that had a label on it that says iPod. And so if you basically ask our model what it is seeing here, then it tells you precisely that. An apple with a label on it that says iPod. OK, so that's cool. But it's not just a captioning model. I mean, these have been done before, captioning models. You can also do something like that, where you ask the same question on 2 different images. You can ask, what caused the mess on the carpet? And so the model will tell you either the dog or the carpet was stained by a spilled drink, based on visual observation. Right? So this is kind of like reasoning in a way, right? It's a light form of reasoning. It's not what would make kind of the critics of conceptual thinking and deep learning happy, but it is reasoning from observation in a way. And also what we also have seen from these world models is world knowledge. So on the left-hand side, the sign is clearly visible. And if I ask the model about its contents, it can read it back to me. It can read, it can say Black Lives Matter. And if I cut the sign off so that the model cannot read the complete sign, like half of the sign is missing, and I'm asking about the contents of the sign, I'm still getting the correct answer. How is that? I mean, we've seen this from the language models. It's not a surprise, really, that these models retain world knowledge. So they're able to fill in information that's not in the prompt alone, that they have learned from their world understanding. And there are even some things that surprised me fundamentally, right? This is one of them. This is an interesting image, and the model asks what it's seeing, says it's the scorp with a Shovelzer on, yellow background, and then I looked up the word Shovelzer because I wasn't aware that it exists, and it seems it doesn't exist, right? It seems to be like an invented word that is somewhat of a combination of shovel and maybe stinger. I'm not sure, but from a human perspective, it sounds right. It sounds like maybe that's a Shovelzer. Who knows, right? And the same goes for that. If I'm kind of showing this hand-drawn treasure map to the model, and I'm asking it, the treasure is buried, I'm getting in the old oak tree. And if I'm asking in German, I haven't brought this example, it says das alte Eichenholz. So it also translates if I ask in German. And that's pretty interesting because it's implicitly doing OCR, and some people have told me that this is superior to their dedicated OCR models. But it also knows that the red X must mean that there's the treasure there, because this is not written anywhere, right? Why does the red X mean that it's about treasure? Of course, for us humans, perfectly clear. We've seen so many treasure maps that we know what to expect and how to read them. Yeah, and then you may have seen PaLM, Pathway Language Models, explaining jokes, right? So I've been playing around with some interesting observations explaining those. So here you have two trucks driving behind each other. One is full of pallets, and the other has a sticker on pallets wanted. And so ask about this, the model says, it shows the irony of the situation, a truck driver trying to get his pallet business back on track. And ask about this. This maybe happened because the seagulls are not happy with the new rules. This is also cool. I like this image because it's funny and the truck is a perfect target for the flames. So this is remarkable, right? It's also remarkable that PaLM is explaining jokes. But it's pretty interesting that these are things, if you would have shown this to me 2 years ago and told me that AI is answering these kind of questions, I would have not believed it. I would have said, these are typical human things, right? These kind of things that we find these things funny, that we enjoy this humor. This is a very human thing, and it'll be super difficult for AI to explain or to understand these. And you can, every time I say understand, somebody in the comments says, AIs don't truly understand, and I get that, right? I'm not against that. I'm not claiming that it's the same thing that human understanding is supposed to mean. So, and then I had one discussion, and so my conversation partner told me that it's never going to be AGI until it can get up in the woods and chop down a tree. And I think that's a fair point, right? And we are always in the information space here, and if we are kind of being truly visionary about AGI, then we need to go a step further, right? The AI, the AGI, the true AGI needs to be able to help Fabian out with his place in the woods. So let's have a look at that. So this is, again, our multimodal model. I'm showing it a picture of a cockpit of an Audi, and I'm asking, what is the first step to start this car? And the answer is turn on the ignition. Second thing would be putting the key in and turning it clockwise until you hear a click sound from the inside of vehicle indicating that your engine has started up successfully. Then put into drive gear or reverse if needed for driving forward, backward, respectively. So it has obviously some world knowledge about how to drive a car, and that's cool. But now I actually want to have it drive the car. And one of the things we're currently working on that will be in the API soon, TM, is an explainability endpoint that can give you the impact of everything in the completion for everything in the prompt. And this is a preview here. So I'm looking at the impact for the word key. So I'm asking the model, like this word, how does that relate to your prompt? And so this is kind of the overlay that you're getting there. So this model not only can generate text, it also has an idea on how this text relates to the text in the prompt or to the image in the prompt. So I don't think it's terribly unrealistic to assume that you could hook this up to robotics in any way. Right? So that's a few steps out. It's not super clear how to do this, but why not, right? So, so I think these world models can not only generate the same representation we have in their input layer, so like a text-based world model can generate text, or a multimodal world model can generate multimodal output, but they can also be linked up to our physical world because they have an understanding of our physical world, especially when you go into visual domain. All right, so what are some problems with these models? One of the problems is consistency and bias and input dependency. So here I'm asking our model two things, twice the same question, once in German, once in French, about its favorite sports team. And asked in German, I'm getting Bayern Munich, and asked in French, I'm getting Olympique Marseille. Right, so this is, of course, makes sense in a way, right? Because you're saying that maybe a French person might prefer a French team, or like a German person. So, and in understanding these models, you should never think of these as having an opinion or an agency, right? They're just giving pattern matching that are likely, right? So it's not like the model loves football or soccer. It's just giving you likely completions. But those heavily depend on the input. And the lower prompt is from GPT-3. So GPT-3 works all right-ish in German. And if you prompt GPT-3 in German and ask about the favorite sports team, you're getting the New York Giants. And this makes sense, right? It's an English-centric, US-centric data set. So the world knowledge, the culture, the values that we have in these models are impacted by your selection of training data, and sometimes in invisible ways. So this is somewhat dangerous, because those models are so powerful that the results cannot be easily interpreted. Another problem these models have are consistency. So we have a value in function in ourselves that's driving truthful and consistent answers, like our character, our self-consistency. And these models don't have that. So I'm asking twice very similar questions. The most incredibly beautiful German towns are, and the first answer is city of Heidelberg and its castle, Rothenburg ob der Tauber with its medieval streets. In Bavaria, you find Munich. And asked, of all the German cities of varying sizes, the most beautiful are, I'm getting Berlin and Hamburg, which of course is wrong, right? But so you see, right? These models are not consistent. You can't use them as truth machines, or you can't expect them to be consistent. They don't have agencies, and they don't follow goals. So you have to, in a way, understand them as a web search. If I would punch into like a web search, all men are, and the first result would be all men are lazy, I wouldn't say the Google AI is sexist, right? I would just say, yeah, that's somewhere out in the world. Somebody has written that, right? And the AI maybe thinks it's a good completion. It's a good search result. It's not a view the AI holds or like an agency it has. And then this is also funny, right? So these world models also have another difficulty with things that are almost known. So these are images generated for the prompt, a horse riding an astronaut. And very clearly, this is not a horse riding an astronaut, but an astronaut riding a horse. And I like to think that this is a mistake that we as humans also like to make. Sometimes if we hear something in passing, if we only see something vaguely, right, we might interpolate it as something we are aware of, something that seems common to us. And the same thing can happen with these models, right? Because I have learned that riding is typically done to a horse and not by a horse. But it turns out it's possible to get the right thing if you modify the prompt slightly so you can get this or this. If you modify the prompt into a horse riding on back of an astronaut or a horse riding on shoulders of an astronaut. All right, so again, right, a word of caution, that sometimes if you encounter things that are highly unlikely in terms of the world structure that the model has learned, it may get them wrong. And the same happens with our model. So this is our multimodal model, and it says here, no regrets tattoo on chest for man, which is, again, right, almost correct. And what a human at first glance might have also seen. I like to call them worst models traps. And for this reason, it's super important to shape the human-machine interaction in a way that takes these capabilities and properties into account. And the last kind of thing I wanted to have you thinking about is basically, so this is the pre-cloud era where we had an infrastructure functionality and intelligence functionality that was like algorithms or machine learning models, and then a solution with UX and product-specific industry solutions. And now we are basically at a level where the hyperscalers are owning all the infrastructure layer, and it has become incredibly more powerful. The features we are getting out of very simple to use hyperscaler infrastructure functions is quite remarkable. But still, the AI, the intelligence is still very fragmented. Everybody is fine-tuning their own models and tweaking around with solutions. And what will happen, I would assume, is that we're seeing general intelligence layers that will be owned by a few key players. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jonas.